We're getting started a couple minutes late here. We're just going to give it another minute or so for folks to join before we kick it off. But thanks so much for joining us. And just as a note, we're going to have a Q&A available throughout the webinar. So you'll see at the bottom of the panel, there's a Q&A option, and we've got folks that will be monitoring that. And we will have a section at the end of this webinar to go through questions, and our panelists will answer them. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use that feature. But you know what, let's just get started here without any further ado. Thanks for joining us. My name is Melissa Ostroff. I'm the Pennsylvania Policy and Field Advocate with Earthworks. And we're here today to do a progress report on the 5 years that have passed since the grand jury report on fracking that came out in 2020. This was under then Attorney General Shapiro, now our governor. And so with it being June 25th today, exactly 5 years to the date of that report coming out, we felt it was important to look at the progress over the last 5 years. If we can move to the next slide. So just a little agenda for today. So we'll be starting out talking about just an introduction to this topic, why we're here today, what the grand jury report was about, what the findings were. Then we'll be moving to our progress report. So where do we stand in implementing those recommendations here in Pennsylvania? We'll be going over the white paper that just came out from the Environmental Health Project, polling that was recently done by the Ohio River Valley Institute, helping us to understand what Pennsylvanians think about this topic, and then some calls to action, things that you can do as a participant here on this call as a Pennsylvanian, and then we will move to question and answer. Next slide. So again, I'm Melissa Ostroff. I'm here from Earthworks, but we've got several different groups on the call, including local partners, Protect PT, Environmental Health Project, and Center for Coalfield Justice. And then on the next slide, we've got Earthworks and Sierra Club. Next slide. And we've got several different folks that will be speaking today. Myself from Earthworks, Jillian Graber, who's the Executive Director of Protect PT, Jody Borello, a Washington County community organizer with the Center for Coalfield Justice, Erin Makatora, who's the project coordinator for Appalachia for the Environmental Health Project, and Lauren Posey, who's the environmental policy advocate at Protect PT. So why are we here today? So 5 years ago, a report came out that had 8 different recommendations around how Pennsylvania can respond to fracking in our state and the impact on residents. And those recommendations came from about a year of fact-finding and interviews that were done with residents that have been impacted by fracking, that were impacted at the time, and many of whom are still impacted today. That the residents spent numerous hours talking to folks from the Attorney General's office to describe the impacts of fracking, to help the Attorney General's office collect information. And all of that was put together into the grand jury report that came out on June 25th, 2020. A press conference was held that day, and 8 recommendations came forward from that report. And we're going to move to the next slide to talk through those 8 recommendations. So the grand jury's 8 recommendations covered a few different areas. They started with expanding no drill zones, so protective buffers or setback distances. They touched on transparency around the chemicals that are used in drilling, regulation of gathering lines, cumulative impacts from air pollution, transportation of waste, formulating a comprehensive health response to the effects of living near unconventional drilling, limiting the ability of PADEP employees to be employed in the private sector, so addressing issues around the kind of revolving door with the industry, and then allowing the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General original criminal jurisdiction over unconventional oil and gas companies. So again, these findings all came from a long process that involved review of evidence from impacted residents directly, as well as scientific evidence. And this was done under the supervision of then Attorney General Shapiro, our now governor. Moving to the next slide. So we put together a progress report to try to understand, looking at these 8 recommendations, what has Pennsylvania been able to accomplish in this time? 5 years is not a short time period for residents that are living next to oil and gas pollution. And so we want to understand how were these recommendations addressed in that time period. So our ranking system has the best possible option would be the check mark. It's done. This recommendation has fully been implemented. The plus mark would be we're moving in the right direction towards that recommendation. And then the X is little to no progress. So we really haven't made much progress towards the recommendation. Next slide. So we're going to move on to reviewing each of these recommendations one by one, and I'm going to turn it over to Jody Borello to get us started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jody Borello, and I am a community organizer at the Center for Coalfield Justice. I want to thank you all for being here today. This is really important for impacted residents, for people to be here and know what's happening in our communities. So I want to thank you for being here today. And before I get started, I would like to again remind everyone that these 8 recommendations are based on the testimony of numerous citizens of our state, including myself, that testified at the both the 43rd and 46th statewide grand juries. That we suffered terribly at the hands of the oil and gas industry and a lack of government oversight. It took a lot of courage for us to tell our stories to the grand jury, and many of us were fearful of the repercussions. We hope that our testimony and the 8 recommendations would immediately help others, yet here we are today. So as we go through each of these recommendations, I want you to remember that they were each created from someone's very, very painful experience, and I don't want us to lose sight of that. So I'll hop right into the increased setbacks. So on April 8th of 2025, Pennsylvania Environmental Quality Board tabled a petition to increase the minimum setback distance of unconventional wells from 500 feet to 3,281 feet. Tabling this petition directly harmed the residents of our state. We are in need of setback protections as quickly as possible. CNX Resources and the governor's office are taking steps through their mutual interest agreement to increase the setback distance from 500 feet to 600 feet. But I want to remind everyone that CNX Resources is a criminal company and should have no say in setback distances based on their prior criminal record. And the governor's office should be promoting the grand jury recommendation of 2,500 feet. Our local senator, Cameron Bertolotta, introduced Senate Bill 102 that would punish communities that implement setback ordinances by allowing the PUC to withhold impact fees. So we give an overall ranking of little to no progress. And next slide, please. Fracking chemicals. The Shapiro administration implemented new policies that require operators to publicly disclose chemicals they use in drilling. The details are contained in the company's site-specific PPC plan, which can be found online. Proprietary chemicals used in the drilling and fracking process are still exempt. The chemical manufacturing companies decide what is proprietary, and often the drilling company doesn't know what they're using. So we give an overall rating of movement in the right direction. Gathering lines. The U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PIMSA, issued a final rule on November 2nd of 2021, expanding federal oversight of gathering lines. Previously, unregulated gathering lines in rural areas now have federal minimum safety standards based on certain categories. However, this doesn't include all sections of the gathering line. So we would like to see the state expand on this. We give an overall rating of movement in the right direction. Air pollution. Currently, the DEP will approve permits as long as they meet the permit requirements with no consideration of other nearby polluting infrastructure and no consideration of health impacts. House Bill 109 would give the DEP the ability to deny permits in environmental justice areas based on cumulative impacts of pollution on the community where the project is being proposed. So we give this an overall rating of movement in the right direction. And now I'll pass on to Jillian.
Jillian, we can't hear you. It looks like you're muted now, so maybe if you could unmute again,
Can you hear me?
AirPod. Yep, now you're good.
Okay. Is that better, Melissa?
Yep, 100%.
Can you hear me? Awesome. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So sorry about that. My audio settings were not working properly, but so I wanted to mention on the last thing that Jody was talking about with air pollution, on that slide, there's actually a picture of our map, our fracking map that we have on Protect PT's website. If folks would, yeah, so right there, that picture. So if you go to protectpt.org, we've mapped out actually all of the well pads in our community with this air pollution in mind. When I started Protect PT 10 years ago, there was one well pad proposed, and now there are 14. So we see that this industry is coming more and more into communities, and in particular in our community, it's very densely populated. So people can go on to protectpt.org and look at our fracking map. We have data from Westmoreland and Allegheny County, which is where we live and work. So definitely check that out after the webinar, and we can pop the link in the chat for y'all. But if you go ahead and go to the next slide. The next recommendation is the transportation of waste. And so requiring greater, safer transport of contaminated waste created by fracking sites. It has been known that fracking waste contains hazardous chemicals and also radium 226, 228, some really radioactive materials as well, and heavy metals. Yet because of a federal law, this waste is actually categorized as non-hazardous waste. But the report by the AG's office cites that this is something that can be improved and should be improved to protect the people of Pennsylvania. And just as a reminder, these are people that had given their real world experiences for testimony to produce this report. So, people have trucks transporting hazardous and radioactive waste in their community. And actually, even if you don't live near a well pad, if the waste from that well pad is going to a landfill or an injection well in your community, you're still being exposed. Trucks transportation. There's also buried water lines. And this is just a really bad practice because We don't know where these water lines are. We don't know which water lines are categorized as wastewater lines or freshwater lines. This is not given, this information is not given to the public. And so not the public not knowing they could have hazardous waste running through the community underneath the earth. And we don't know if these lines are constructed properly. We also have rail transport of hazardous waste. Which, trains do derail, and hazardous waste can be contaminate groundwater and surface water and communities. And the barging of fracking waste. Actually, years ago, barging was proposed of fracking waste from Washington County, PA, right on the Monongahela, with the border of Westmoreland County into Ohio. So actually using the three rivers here in Pittsburgh to barge that waste, which is a really terrible idea. And so this is something we need to keep watching out for, and a practice that should, quite frankly, be changed. And so if you, like I said, if you're living near a site where this waste is being dumped, you're still potentially being exposed to it. Even landfills. So we're seeing that landfills have had oil and gas waste dumped for the last at least decade in the landfill. And it's because it's not properly tested for these heavy metals and radium, radon, radium 226 and 228. We're seeing now that landfills and actually landfill leachate is now being affected with the constituents from oil and gas. So it's something to look out for. And last but not least, workers. Workers are not properly trained and not sometimes told that this waste that they're carrying is actually toxic. So we would hope that there would be some movement on this. So we give a very poor rating on this because we really haven't seen anything happen on this. There have been some bills that have been produced that have been proposed, but really they haven't moved along. And we'd like to see this move along, in a positive direction because, like I said, it has been 5 years and nothing's been done. And we know that this waste is very harmful to communities. Next slide. So in addition, one of the recommendations was a health response. So conducting a comprehensive health response to the effects of living near shale gas development. And studies have really been ignored. So the governor should acknowledge the recent pit study. And even before the pit study, hundreds of studies had been out, for the last decade, showing how people living in close proximity to unconventional gas development are more likely to have increased health impacts. And so the pit study is just one other example of that. And I know our friend and colleague Erin is going to talk a little bit more about some of the health aspects, but this was one of the recommendations. This study was fully funded and staffed, and we really want that. We want a fully funded staff to react to these issues. While the PA budget is currently being finalized, this should be something that's front of mind for those folks at our state level. And of course, the CNX reports that came out with just some junk science that really just are taking us in the wrong direction with the type of scientific studies that need to be done around these well pads. And all these links are hot links, and we're going to provide them to anybody that registered. So you'll get the links and you can read the articles for yourself that are linked in here. Next slide, please. Okay, and then in environmental protection employment. So limiting the ability of Pennsylvania DEP or Department of Environmental Protection employees from being employed in the private sector immediately after leaving the department. So we see that this is a revolving door that leads to cozy relationships between regulators and industry. And rightly so, this should be a recommendation that should be followed through with. And this recommendation regulation has also not seen any movement. DEP investigators will be less likely to impose fines on a company that could be their future employer. And so we want to see this move forward. I know that there has been some updates to the policies, the employment policies within the state, but we want to see this really uh, more enforced, and there be some type of substantive change. So we gave this also a very poor rating. Former DEP employees bring their regulatory knowledge to a company, and these companies can claim that it's a benefit, but they might be actually using that knowledge to dodge the regulations rather than follow them properly. So next slide. And then criminal jurisdiction. So allowing the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General original criminal jurisdiction over unconventional oil and gas companies. So there have been some bills that have been proposed. Thank you to Tom from Sierra Club for popping the links and the bills in the chat here. So again, these are all hot links. You can research these for yourself. We would hope that any bills that are proposed that move this forward even more would move forward. But now we're not seeing, even 5 years later, we're not seeing the type of protection from oil and gas operators. And in fact, this is an example of one of the operators in our community, Olympus Energy, receiving violations of discharge, unlawful discharge of industrial waters into waters of the Commonwealth, which happens very frequently. We give this also, there's no movement happening here, and we want to see some movement really quickly. Operators are held accountable. So there should be no referral needed from an attorney or a district attorney from the DEP. And that's typically how the process was done. If someone wanted to start a criminal investigation, they would have to contact the district attorney's office. We in fact did this several years ago for local operators here, and we did not get a response. And this is a problem. There are now on the AG's website, there are some updated hotlines and things like that we're going to provide for folks at the end, but we just need to make sure that DEP is not issuing permits to habitual violators, and that happens every single day. We see operators like Olympus, who I think currently to date has almost over 700 violations. And many of these are health and safety violations, not just administrative violations. And we see them getting new permits every day. This is a big problem. And actually DEP has the ability to measure this when they're approving a permit, and they just don't use their discretion to do that. And that's a big problem. So next slide, please. So we went over the 8 recommendations, right? But before we move on to Erin, I just wanted to mention that, from the press conference, literally 5 years ago to the day, and actually I think it was around noon also, so it might be the time, Josh Shapiro was speaking, to the people of Pennsylvania as the Attorney General. Now he's the governor, and his quotes are, "Our government has a duty to set and enforce ground rules that protect public health and safety. We are the referee. We are here to prevent big corporations and the powerful industries from harming our communities or running over the rights of citizens," said Attorney General Shapiro. When it comes to fracking, Pennsylvania has failed. Now it's time to face the facts and do what we can to protect the people of this Commonwealth by encouraging the Department of Environmental Protection to partner with us and by passing the grand jurors' common sense reforms. So just to recap, many of these reforms that we talked about got the worst case, little to no progress. So 5 years later, we really have not seen that progress. And we are here today, hopefully hopefully Governor Shapiro is watching or someone from his staff is watching. We did invite those folks to the webinar today. We are hoping that they will see this and see that Pennsylvanians can't wait another 5 years for these protections to be changed because, like as Jody said, these are real world impacts that are impacting communities every day. Next slide, and I think that is the last for me.
Thank you so much for that, Jody and Jillian. My name is Aaron. I'm from Environmental Health Project, and I'm going to be covering kind of what are the next steps. So, in April of this year, the Environmental Health Project released a follow-up to our 2022 white paper that was titled "What the Shapiro Administration Can Do Better to Protect Public Health." In the paper, we focused on Governor Shapiro, who, as we've just heard, has spoken passionately about the importance of protecting public health from shale gas development. And in 2020, the grand jury report, in the grand jury report, then Attorney General Shapiro found industry and regulatory failures and made recommendations in order to address them. He then campaigned for governor, promising stronger health protections for Pennsylvanians. And while there has been some efforts in order to better protect the health of residents of the Commonwealth, the Shapiro administration has room for improvement to protect Pennsylvanians' constitutional right to clean air and pure water. And based off of this assessment of Governor Shapiro's first 2 years in office, Environmental Health Project suggests the following specific actions by his administration that his administration can take to defend public health in the face of shale gas development while prioritizing a just transition towards renewable energy. Next slide, please. As you might know, some of these are going to sound a little bit familiar, but the things that Environmental Health Project recommends first is an increase in setback distances from shale gas infrastructure. Setbacks or protective buffers between shale gas operations and occupied buildings are currently governed by PA Act 13, which established certain legal requirements around this industry. The governor can urge the General Assembly to amend Act 13 and mandate greater setbacks for all operators. While no distance has been established as safe, EHP recommends setback distances of at least 1 kilometer or about 3,300 feet or a little over a half a mile for small facilities and at least 2 kilometers or about 6,600 feet or 1.25 miles for larger facilities and from schools, nursing homes, and other structures accommodating vulnerable populations. But because farther is ultimately better for reducing health harms, the industry should not be allowed to have exemptions or waivers from these distances for any reason. Recommendation number 2, public disclosures of all chemicals used in shale gas development. Changing the law around chemical disclosures may require legislative action. If chemical disclosures cannot be changed through DEP rulemaking, Governor Shapiro should press the legislature to act and require operators to fully disclose all chemicals that they use, even those that are considered proprietary or a trade secret. This disclosure should ideally be made to the general public or, at bare minimum, to government agencies, public works administrators, emergency preparedness and response teams, and medical practitioners treating affected patients, all of whom require this data. Governor Shapiro can urge the legislature to consider the full life cycle of all toxic pollutants involved in shale gas development when requiring operators to disclose what they put into the ground and what comes back out during those operations. Number 3, developing a comprehensive health plan for preventing fossil fuel pollution exposure. Holding profit-motivated industries to account is one role governments must assume to best defend residents' health. The Shapiro administration must take a more proactive and higher profile role in defending the health of Pennsylvanians from oil and gas pollution with a comprehensive health response. Such a response would include an honest recognition of the health impacts associated with shale gas development, and sufficient provisions for full funding and staffing of agencies with strong enforcement authority. For epidemiological research, epidemiological research shows serious health impacts from shale gas development. It is already substantial and sufficient to inform swift action. Governor Shapiro must acknowledge the inherent health risks of these operations and task his agencies with taking the appropriate action to reduce these risks. This research includes the findings of the Pennsylvania Health and Environment Studies, otherwise known as the PIT studies that were previously mentioned, which Governor Shapiro has yet to acknowledge since their release. For the Department of Health, PA Department of Health, they have recently taken a more open approach to confronting health harms experienced by communities in the front lines of shale gas development. But more could be done with adequate support from the governor. Adequate support would enable this agency to create and distribute comprehensive resources, actionable guidance, and adequate health response and investigations near existing facilities, as well as providing health impact assessments and evaluations of additional considerations for environmental justice communities before the permitting and development of new facilities. And for the DEP, which has regulatory authority over the shale gas industry, they must hold it accountable by requiring accurate and timely monitoring and reporting of regular emissions and upsets, providing public access to that collected data, and strictly enforcing rules and regulations with fines and other meaningful punitive consequences. Other high priority items should include closing the hazardous waste loopholes, monitoring radioactivity at shale gas sites and landfills, requiring safer transport and contaminated waste created from drilling sites, and regulating gathering lines fully, which are used to transport shale gas hundreds of miles, reducing opportunities for leaks and explosions and other health risks throughout. And 4, address the cumulative emissions when permitting sites. As part of this permitting process, the DEP should cumulatively analyze emissions from all sources of air pollution in a given area to accurately assess air quality and limit shale gas development in airsheds that are already burdened with pollution. Currently, shale gas facilities are permitted for air pollution emissions as standalone entities, but emissions from new facilities, when combined with other existing emission sources nearby, may result in dangerous exposure levels in ambient air, which may cause adverse acute and chronic health impacts. And for that reason, such considerations must be included in the permitting process. Please forward to the next slide. Number 5, increasing funding for state agencies to better fulfill their missions. Governor Shapiro must put forward the General Assembly must approve state budgets that include adequate funding for the agencies like the Department of Health and the DEP, so that they can effectively do their job of protecting Pennsylvania's resources and the health of residents. While the increase in funding approved for the 2024 and 2025 budget and the request for more DEP funding in the 2025 and 2026 budget are a start, more funds must be channeled to the enforcement arm of the DEP to effectively monitor public exposure of pollutants from the shale gas industry and other sources. And similarly, the Department of Health must be fully funded to do the difficult but essential work of addressing health concerns from impacted residents and disseminating timely guidance. Number 6, initiate more transparency and interaction with impacted communities. Governor Shapiro must call on the DOH and DEP to work closely and transparently with communities, providing potential impacted residents with health protective strategies to combat pollution exposure and ensure that voices of residents, especially those experiencing environmental and health harms, are heard. These residents should know who to contact when they have an issue and where to go for relevant information, and the appropriate agency should acknowledge and act upon that information and respond to any residents' communication in a timely manner. The DOH should continue to inform medical providers with health risks of shale gas development so that they can share guidance with patients to help mitigate those risks, and elevate the Environmental Justice Office of the DEP. Elevating the Environmental Justice Office of the DEP is a good start, but more can be done to support a two-way communication with residents and to elevate their experiences when developing health protective policy. And number 7, taking a precautionary approach to petrochemicals, blue hydrogen, and liquid natural gas industries and other industries that use fossil fuels. These industries require proactive and comprehensive oversight. If allowed to operate at all, these industries must be compelled to effect stringent emission detection and reporting, working with communities to reduce exposure and to alert the public of the content of its releases, whether planned or accidental. Government agencies must be intrinsically involved in making sure the industry complies with pollution standards, holding operators accountable when they do not, and health impact assessments and other community health monitoring must be put in place to ensure residents' health is protected today and into the future. Residents must be informed fully about the health risks which they are or will be exposed to. Communities must be given a say in whether this development happens within their borders, and clear channels of communications between governmental agencies, industrial operators, and community leaders must be established and supported as long as shale gas development is allowed to operate. And finally, working boldly and creatively to transition away from fossil fuels and towards renewable forms of energy. Other states have made great progress in embracing the renewable energy economy by leveraging federal dollars to boost job creation and put their communities in a path to greater economic prosperity. Pennsylvania is on the verge of being left behind, but this does not have to be its legacy. With its strong roots in manufacturing, its expertise in technology and medical research, and an existing workplace and an existing workforce that is energy oriented, Pennsylvania has what it takes to become a renewable energy leader, creating sustainable jobs, reducing health impacts and healthcare costs, and saving lives. The Shapiro administration must take bold steps to raise Pennsylvania from its lowly position of lagging the rest of the country in renewable energy creation to one where renewable energy becomes a primary health protective driver of the state's economy. The continued reliance and emphasis on fossil fuel sourced industries will only put the state further behind its goal. A just energy transition must begin today, and it must have the full force of Governor Shapiro's voice and the full attention of his administration and the agencies that work for him. Only then can the Shapiro administration say that it is truly working to protect the health and well-being of Pennsylvanians. Pennsylvania is not in a position to wait for more information and one more study before acting. Such a continued delay will only allow more people to be harmed by this polluting industry. Additional, well-constructed, unbiased, and independent studies, even if they are conducted, will undoubtedly add more reliable information to the existing body of public health knowledge, but their absence should not preclude immediate action to protect the residents of the Commonwealth when ample, relevant, and useful information are already available. As then Attorney General Shapiro demanded in the grand jury report, the governor must take swift action to address the recommendations put forth there, as well as incorporating other health protective measures to defend the health of communities and families across Pennsylvania. We call on Governor Shapiro to do that now through fully realizing grand jury recommendations, as well as incorporating the additional recommendations that I have just presented here.
Thank you, Erin. And so now I'll just talk a little bit about what do Pennsylvanians think. And according to a poll that was conducted by the Ohio River Valley Institute, or ORVI, 9 in 10 of the likely voters in PA supported increased restrictions on fracking. There was near unanimity on stricter regulations on fracking, including requiring companies to disclose chemicals used in drilling operations, which received 94% approval, requiring safer transportation of fracking waste, which received 93% approval, expanding air monitoring near fracking wells, 92% approval, and increasing setback distances from schools and hospitals, which received 90% approval. So we can see that there's a broad base of support among Pennsylvanians for these protections to be put into place. Everyone wants clean air, clean water. No one wants to have to worry about what they're breathing in simply because of where their home is located or what development happens to occur nearby. And so this is something that we can show Shapiro, Governor Shapiro, that Pennsylvanians broadly, by and large, would like to see him do. Oh, see. Is my screen share still working well? I clicked on something.
Looks like we can see the full, like not just the presentation, but like the full
Okay.
view.
Odd. Let me try to. Okay,
There we go.
we're back. Okay, and so what are our asks for the governor? Governor Shapiro, we want you to institute increased state setbacks from drilling now, which he's able to do by submitting the protective buffers petition for further study by the Department of Environmental Protection. This petition has been brought forward by residents and environmental groups, and it is up for consideration now in the Environmental Quality Board. It is being reviewed by members of the Environmental Quality Board, and we hope that in the coming months they will vote on whether or not to move the petition forward for further study by the DEP. If that happens, then the DEP will give it a deep research and legal assessment, and then the DEP will create a recommendation on whether or not it thinks the Environmental Quality Board should approve the rulemaking petition or deny it. And we're really hoping to see that petition be submitted for further study. We want the desires of residents to be given a good, honest shot, and Governor Shapiro has a lot of power and influence in order to make that happen, and to let our petition be moved forward for study. We also would like to see the governor implement a strong state plan for oil and gas methane reduction. The EPA finalized a rule in 2024 to reduce methane emissions and other air pollutants from oil and gas operations. And as part of that plan, all of the states in our country have to create their own plan that aligns with the EPA's guidelines in order to reduce methane. And so Pennsylvania has been working on its plan. The proposed plan is currently out, and the public comment period is open. So they're taking public feedback in the form of written comments and verbal testimony at hearings. And we would like to see this plan move forward, and we want to see it move forward in a way where it is strong, legally durable, robust, and adequately protective, and will help create a brighter, cleaner, safer future. We would also like the governor to recognize the pit studies and incorporate them into action. And we would also like the governor to take a frack land tour, which is an opportunity to visit fracking sites alongside affected residents and see firsthand what people are experiencing, what their daily lives are like, and the impacts of this development when it's so close to people's homes and schools. This is something that Governor Shapiro has not yet done. And then what are our asks for you? If you want to get a little bit more involved, we have a number of different actions you can take. We do have a letter form where you can send a letter to Governor Shapiro's office asking him to support the petition for increased drilling setbacks. Super easy. You just go in, you put in your information. We have a sample letter all ready for you, and you're able to edit it and put in your own personal story and comments. And then you can just hit send, and it'll be sent off to his Office of Environmental Affairs. You can also participate in the DEP's public hearings for methane reduction. If you go to the DEP's webpage there, it has everything all nicely laid out. There's a link where you can go and read over the plan. They list all of the different public hearings that are available. There's different hearings available regionally across the state in your area. And there's also 2 virtual hearings that are very easy to attend from anywhere. And you'll have the meeting information available on that webpage as well. And it also tells you how you can submit a written comment. You just have to go into their e-comment platform and submit it and make sure you're indicating that the comment is about the methane rule. And if you've been harmed by fracking in PA, you can contact the Attorney General's site. They have both a phone number that you can call, and there's a web page that you can access. So you are able to report your harms. And if you're interested in keeping up with bills that could advance our progress in implementing these 8 recommendations, we invite you to visit this helpful legislative tracker that Sierra Club has made. It'll list any of the bills that have been proposed that are relevant and of interest in this area. And it'll be helpful for staying up to date. And we always encourage you to reach out to your legislator and let them know your thoughts and opinions if you see a bill that you as a resident would like to support or oppose. And so now we'll open up the floor to questions and we'll take a look. I see we've got a few in the Q&A chat.
Yeah, so the first question we have is from John. He says, is Shapiro limited in improving fracking protections by the Republican majority in the Senate? To what extent does better protection from fracking depend on legislative approval? And here, our panelists want to take that one.
Yeah, so I think Melissa and I both added some content here. So the governor and the legislature should be working together to protect the people of Pennsylvania, or both are violating their trustee duties to the residents of Pennsylvania. This is not a finger pointing game. This is a real life experience that many people here in Pennsylvania experience every day, the harms of fracking. So our message would be stop finger pointing and start acting on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania. There are things that Governor Shapiro can and should do now, which we've outlined in our presentation, like protective buffers. And so, Melissa, do you want to talk a little bit more about protective buffers? And I know that actually goes on to the second question too. We're talking about the protective buffers.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So there are definitely some recommendations that came out of the grand jury report that would not require new legislation to be passed in order for the recommendation to be implemented. And increasing setback distances is a good example of that. As was mentioned earlier, a number of residents worked with a couple of environmental groups to file a petition for a rulemaking to increase setback distances from oil and gas sites last October. So that was submitted to the DEP, and then the Environmental Quality Board took a look at that petition actually a couple of months ago. And the decision point there is whether or not to move it forward for further study, which if it moves forward for further study, that could lead to a new rulemaking and no new legislation or no work with the legislature would be necessary to make that happen. And something that was really interesting that happened at that last EQB meeting was that folks at DEP who spoke about the petition described the petition as making what they called a sophisticated legal argument that really deserves further examination for this possibility of a rulemaking around setbacks. And DEP did recommend that the report move forward for further study, but unfortunately, EQB chose to table the petition at that meeting. They said they wanted some more time to review it. But as we've discussed, residents have already waited for 5 years for really any kind of semblance of movement on increasing setback distances. So we were clearly very disappointed about that. But that's just one example of options for the governor to take action without waiting for the legislature.
Yeah, and just briefly adding on to that, I see there's a question in the Q&A. What is the relationship between the DEP and the EQB? The EQB, or Environmental Quality Board, is the rulemaking body for the DEP. So any sort of decision about what kind of rule or policy that the DEP is going to have, that's decided by the Environmental Quality Board.
Okay, the next question we have for setbacks, is that simply a decision by the EQB, or does that need legislative approval?
just reiterate that no legislative approval would be necessary. I think there is a point in the rulemaking process where the legislature would be consulted, but no legislation would be required for that rulemaking to move forward. I don't know, Tom, if you want to add anything else there.
Yeah, and I would just mention that this is something that's really important to move forward now because, just one example of these well pads being proposed very close proximity to people. We have a well pad that's proposed in our community that's within a mile. There are 3,000 people that live within that distance, and so if this protective setback was implemented, these well pads would be considered more dangerous as they are, and there would be more distance between the people that live near the pads. And keep in mind, this doesn't actually affect any well pads that are currently permitted. This is only new well pads that are going to be permitted in the future. So it doesn't negate the harms that are there now. It just makes it so in the future there's more protection for people of Pennsylvania. It really doesn't give protection to the ones that are there now. So I just wanted to point that out as well.
All right. Someone asked if they can access a link to this presentation. Is this going to be sent around to registrants after the fact? Okay, yes, it will be.
Yes, I will be sending an email to all of the registrants for this event, and I'll be sending you guys the recording as well as a link to the slides, so you'll be able to go through the slide deck and click on any links in there.
Okay, the next question is there anyone on the call who can speak personally to what they have experienced from fracking on or near their property? And how do you feel about the status of these recommendations 5 years later?
Yeah, so I can take that question. I see we only have a couple of minutes left, and if you want to hear my full story, it'll take about 8 hours. So I will condense that into maybe 1 or 2 minutes here. I can tell you again, I don't know if you caught in the beginning of the webinar, I had personally testified at both the 43rd statewide grand jury and the 46th statewide grand jury, which the 46th I testified against CNX Resources, who committed crimes behind my home that affected my family's health and my property. So I do have an extremely vested interest in this due to my harms. I am one of the only ones from the 43rd statewide grand jury that has had their NDA lifted. So I am able to publicly talk about what happened there. But just to break it down and especially hit on the setback recommendation, I live approximately 1,200 feet from a gas well that caused nosebleeds to my family. The particulate matter was off the charts, 8,415. We would go outside, we would be dizzy, we'd have stomach aches, we would have chest pains. And we thought that the horror was going to be over when that well pad was done, when they were done drilling. But what happened, CNX Resources built a pigging station behind my home as well, which is approximately 1,200 feet. When they blow off pressure at this pig station, which they do because you cannot blow off excessive gas at a well pad because you'll be fined. So what the company was doing was pushing that down the line and blowing it off at this unregulated pigging station. And sometimes they would blow off for hours and hours. My family had chemical burns to our eyes and our skin. It was horrific experience. The company did this 3 times a day, 7 days a week, and my children grew up living in a world where they had 60 seconds to run indoors before those emissions that you could visually see blowing into our yard. That is no way for any human being on this earth to live. And if this were happening in another country, everyone would be horrified. But I want you to know that this is happening here in our country, in our state, and in our communities, and we're not going to tolerate it. These recommendations need to be passed. Our governor needs to remove himself from this mutual interest agreement with a criminal company. The governor knows that my family was harmed from a site that was 1,200 feet away. So how the criminal company CNX Resources and the governor's office can say 600 feet is acceptable is unimaginable to me. And I do want to see that changed, and I will make sure that that is changed. So that is my story. I would love to tell you more. You are all welcome to take a frac land tour and come to my home, and I can show you these facilities firsthand. And I appreciate you asking that question because I feel that the people that testified there also really want change, and I do feel that I could speak on their behalf. That we took a very a risk testifying there, and we feel that we were disrespected by these recommendations not being moved further. So thank you for that question.
A question about the Cecil Township ordinance. Can you comment on that ordinance win for setbacks and how that plays into the legal case for a statewide setback?
So I can talk a little bit about the Cecil Township setback. So the local government in Cecil Township responded appropriately to the impacts of their residents and what they had experienced by enacting appropriate setbacks, which they have the legal right to do per the Municipal Planning Code or MPC. The state setback is the floor, not the ceiling. So we should be so local municipalities should be enacting stronger setbacks. Whether the state acts or not, communities that are impacted by fracking really just cannot wait for those setbacks to be increased, especially if we're going to see tactics at the EQB like we did earlier this year, where this process is stalled. So I would just really empower local municipalities to enact appropriate setbacks, because that is one tool that they have in their toolbox. And so, we see that in cases where municipalities have the power, we see them prevailing in these cases. There was just a recent case, a very similar case, not on a well pad, but an injection well in Plum, PA, which is in Allegheny County, where the board felt that they had to approve it. That actually went all the way up to the Commonwealth Court. The Commonwealth Court said, no, you don't have to approve this because you have pressure from the industry. You need to actually find facts of, finding of facts and conclusions of law that support your decision. And that decision has to be based on the health and safety of the community and the ordinance. So there's two things that a board has to consider when approving a permit from the municipality. And sure enough, just this month, the board in Plum voted to not approve that new injection well, based on the recommendations that the health and safety of the people in that community were going to be impacted by that further development. So there are legal mechanisms that municipalities have, and they should be doing that, because also, in addition to the government, in addition to the legislator and Governor Shapiro having those trustee duties, so do local municipalities, and they have the power to use them.
So I think we've reached the end of our hour here, and we've covered a lot. I know if we'd had more time, we could have covered a lot more, and we really appreciate the questions that folks asked. We appreciate your attention to this issue. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. Our contact information is listed here. But as Lauren said, all attendees will receive a recording of the webinar, as well as some of the links that were here in the chat. and the slides, so that if you have any additional questions, you can reach out. And I will just turn it over to Jillian real quick.
Yep. Just want to note that this was live streamed on YouTube, so you can actually go to YouTube right now and share this with people that you think might be interested. So go to Protect PT's YouTube, and you'll be able to find this. So thank you everyone for participating today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.